1988, Dave, is a fascinating year for Jim Crockett Promotions. It's the last year with them at the helm. They sell to Turner in November. Before that, Jim Crockett tries a few pushes back on the Vince McMahon counter-programming strategy, putting Survivor Series and Royal Rumble to kill Starrcade and to try to kill the Bunkhouse Stampede as well with the Royal Rumble special. So he comes back in spring '88 and puts a Clash of the Champions on opposite WrestleMania 4. We know the story, the Sting Flair match. We know the idea. But my question for you, though, in looking at it in terms of the history of Jim Crockett Promotions, did this feel at the time, this move to put Clash against WrestleMania 4, as like a positive and strong thing for Jim Crockett to do, or some kind of last gasp?
I didn't consider it a last gasp at all. I think that like the whole thing is that Vince was bullying everyone, and this was the chance to fight back, and that's kind of what it was.
So there was like a take it to him, Jim kind of feeling.
I mean, Crockett Promotions was going down,
mm-hmm.
but this happening was a retaliation for, it was because you got to remember that Turner Broadcasting was doing the TV, even though they didn't own the company yet, but they were in bed with them. They were their partners, and Ted and Vince, I think they're, again, I don't think Ted like obsessed over Vince McMahon like Vince McMahon likes to say. I don't think but there was a thing of, they did have the bad blood.
Oh, sure.
And they did screw with the Starrcade and things like that. And it was just kind of like, you screwed with us twice, with the original Survivor Series and the original Royal Rumble. You screwed with us twice. So we're going to screw with you on WrestleMania. We're going to put on a free show head-to-head with WrestleMania, and that was it was pure retaliation. And I think the first one worked. The second one didn't work as well.
Mm-hmm.
The first one worked. I think it hurt WrestleMania, and also they blew away WrestleMania that night. I mean, WrestleMania was a shit show, and they had two. The first Clash. I mean, it really wasn't that deep, but the Midnight Express Fantastics match and the Ric Flair Sting match were excellent matches, and they just blew it away.
They moved Starrcade this year, 1988, from Thanksgiving for the first time to December 26th, and so
right. I thought that was a mistake too. But
Chicago didn't really respond too well to it.
No, I mean the thing is
as far as going to other cities,
Well, Chicago was sell it in advance, and they went, and you gotta remember, they went Thanksgiving afternoon, not Thanksgiving night.
Okay,
for Starrcade, which I thought was going to kill them. I mean, when I heard they were going Thanksgiving afternoon in Chicago, I remember because Gary Juster was the promoter then, and he and I.
Yeah, you're right. I stand corrected. Yeah, I mean, they did sell the building out. It's just they didn't have the tradition as you were outlining, but that didn't mean people weren't willing to try it.
But I remember telling Gary Juster when they moved it to the afternoon, with the idea that the cable companies asked them to move. That wasn't really their move. Because the cable companies were like, "Hey, Vince is going to do a show at night.
Right.
You guys in the afternoon. We'll package it together." And Crockett was fine with that. It's like, okay, package it together, And then Vince did the power play, and so they lost all their pay-per-view outlets, but they had already announced it as an afternoon show. And I was thinking, Greensboro in the afternoon. I thought they'd make it, but I thought Thanksgiving afternoon. That's when you eat with your family.
Yes.
This is, But they sold out 2 weeks in advance. I remember like Gary Juster telling me it's like, hey, we sold out 2 weeks in advance. I mean, so Starrcade was big enough and wrestling was big enough that it could overcome, even battling Thanksgiving. But I thought that moving, I think did Vince still run Thanksgiving night for,
Yeah, I think it was, I think the last Thanksgiving night was 90 and then Thanksgiving Eve the next year.
Yeah, like 90-91 was when he moved the Survivor Series, or 90-91 was so he's still running. So they ran from Thanksgiving because Vince was going to run the date, and they were.
I see.
So that's why they did it. But I remember I thought that, okay, you're running from Thanksgiving night, do it Saturday night of that week.
Right.
That's what I thought. I thought Thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving was the tradition. You do Saturday, it's still the tradition. But they moved it to Norfolk. I don't know why they didn't go to Greensboro. If you're going to do Norfolk, you might as well do Greensboro. They did it. What was it, December 26th, right?
December 26th.
Yeah, I remember day after Christmas, and it was it was all right.
Yeah.
I think I remember the Norfolk show being a good show.
Well, what's huge is this is a month after November 21st, 88, where Ted Turner buys Jim
Right.
Crockett Promotions, and the sands shift significantly. Jim Hurd comes in the Pizza Hut truck and takes the helm. How do you remember that point in time? What was the mood, the feeling in the industry about Ted Turner buying in to this degree?
Well, he had to buy because Jim Crockett Promotions was going down, and we all knew it was going down. And here's the thing: none of us had any experience to the idea of people who don't run wrestling running wrestling. I mean, I guess I should have known from Eddie Einhorn, but I was a little kid then. So
Yeah.
I'm not really. I don't know the story of Eddie Einhorn other than it didn't work.
Even then, I'm sure it wasn't this gratuitous where you just walk around CNN Center and just knock on somebody's door and tell them they're running WCW.
Yeah. So we knew that they were going to run, and again, the wrestling people, so to speak, had run Jim Crockett Promotions out of business, and the wrestling people had run Vern Gagne out of business, and Vince had hired a bunch of people who weren't wrestling people, to even though Vince was a wrestling guy, but he'd hired a bunch of people who weren't wrestling guys. So it was almost like wrestling people are incompetent in business at this level at this point now. So we need, real professionals from other businesses to run it, which was it. It sounded good. It wasn't good. It sounded good.
Mhm.
So as it turns out, the guy who Ted Turner Broadcasting puts in charge is a guy named Jack Petrick.
Yes.
And Jack Petrick came from St. Louis, and he was really good friends with Jim Hurd. And Jim Hurd was the director. Jim Hurd managed a TV station in St. Louis, as I recall, like a programmer. But he was also the director of Sam Mushnick's wrestling. So, that was his. That's why Jack Petrick hired him, because hey, he worked in wrestling all these years. He ran the wrestling TV show, and it's really weird because it's like Jim Hurd worked for Sam Mushnick. So when we heard that, it was kind of like, okay, well, I know the kind of wrestling he's going to do, and it's different.
Yeah.
It's very different from Vince. It's different from Dusty. And Dusty had run the company into the ground. So and they were going to hire Larry Matisick as booker,
Mhm.
who at the time was still working for Vince, and Larry Matisick had a great track record in St. Louis as booker. So it was kind of like I was thinking this is going to be pretty good. Well, then everything starts changing. It's like Jim Hurd, whatever that wrestling was that Sam Mushnick liked, and he was really respected Sam Mushnick, but his idea of wrestling was very different from Sam Mushnick.
The Ding Dongs.
Yeah, the ding dongs and all the crazy stuff. So his thing is he looked at he's a TV guy and looks at demos.
Kids.
And the whole thing is like, we're doing as well, like Vince's company was number one, but they're looking at TV ratings, which nobody looked at before. And they're looking at the TV ratings. Like I said, in those days, if you were a wrestling fan, you watched wrestling. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Now, it doesn't necessarily mean for whatever reason, when it came to buying tickets, you usually bought tickets to your hometown show regularly. And if somebody from another, if the other company comes in, you'll buy it once to see them because you want to see it, but you're not going to support them regularly. That's why this is. I mean, there must be a psychological reason, but I never really.
Yeah.
Like you could come in and have this gangbuster show. I remember like the Flair and Garvin. Okay, just to go back to that. That was the first show in Detroit. They did 8,000 people, which was considered a big success. Detroit had been a terrible city for the NWA for years. They do 8,000 people. And everyone in Detroit that went, they were just telling me, this is the greatest show we've ever seen. I mean, they saw Ronnie Garvin win the world title. The crowd was hot. The undercard, you had all those great workers. So they can't wait to come back to Detroit, and they did like, I don't remember the exact number, but I think 1,800 is probably not far off. It's like, how do you drop from 8,000 to 1,800 when the 8,000 people are saying it's the best show they've ever seen? But that's what happened because it was a Vince city by then.
So why was Turner interested anyway in buying the company and not just?
Wrestling was doing great ratings for the station. He was loyal,
But nobody else could buy it, and he just kept running it on his TV.
There was nobody else to buy it at that point.
Yeah,
the only person to buy it would have been Vince, and I don't think he wanted that. They already had bad experience, so it was essentially it was to save the TV. It was TV wrestling built the station
Yep.
in the 70s and early 80s. Now it's the late 80s, and it's still doing. The ratings were definitely way down from what they were, but they were still, some of the highest rated shows on cable. And Ted had loyalty to it. It was 6:05 Saturday was Institution on that.
That's
station.
right. That's right. Well,
So
here's Starrcade '88. We have Flair versus Luger.
yep.
Flair was hesitant to drop the title to Luger, was he not?
No, that never was going to. That was never even a thing here. What the story on this one was?
Oh, okay.
Flair and Luger. The Flair and Luger title change thing was early 1990 when they had the big to do. Early 90, because it was when Sting was going to win it from Flair, which would have been 90. Because Sting was going to win it February 1990, and then Sting got hurt, and then they started having, it was just a bad situation. So what happens here is Dusty has booked Starrcade. Dusty. Okay, so at this point, Dusty and Flair are sick of each other.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yep.
Yeah, it was a real bad situation between the two of them. Tully and Arn had already quit and gone to WWF. JJ, I think, was gone by then too. So Flair was, I don't remember if Matsuda was in yet or that came later. I think Matsuda may have come right after this.
89, yeah.
Yeah. But Flair's the world champion, and Dusty just wants the thing off of Flair because he's just sick of Flair.
Okay.
And all of Flair's friends are gone. It's just a bad situation. Like Tully, the deal with Tully and Arn was, and this was the typical, telling the future of what was going to happen with WCW and Turner. The company hasn't been bought yet, but the Turner people are doing interviews with all the top guys, and they're, the idea is they're going to, they want to find out from the wrestlers, the top wrestlers, what's right, what's wrong, why is the business going down, blah, blah, blah. And these were supposed to be confidential meetings, right? So Tully comes in the meeting and just goes, and Tully used to book. And, he grew up around the business. His dad was a promoter. He was sick of Dusty. So Tully comes in and basically, Jim Crockett listened to Dusty. Dusty's booking has destroyed the company. The finishes, the finishes, blah, blah, blah. And he wasn't wrong. He was right. But it's supposed to be confidential, right? So I don't remember if it was the next day or a week, but all I know is I knew what Tully said, and I know Dusty knew what Tully said, and Dusty wasn't happy. So Tully and Arn were, they were just about done. It was just about it, and they dropped the titles to the Midnight Express, and they got out of town because, I think Dusty kicked them off with a plane or something, and they knew that their goose was cooked. So Tully and Arn are gone.
And to be clear, Dusty had the book, so it wasn't going to go well for them.
No. They were going to be Terry Taylor.
Right.
So they knew to get out.
So they're gone.
So now it's Rick. So Dusty decides that he wants to book Starrcade, a cage match, Ric Flair against Rick Steiner. Okay, Rick Steiner is not world championship material. And his finish is Rick Steiner wins in 5 minutes, clean in the middle.
See, I had the conception, Dave, that was that Dusty came up with Steiner versus Flair in response to being enraged that Flair didn't want to lose to Luger or was putting up a stink about it. Okay.
No. It was a hit on Ric Flair. It was always a hit on Luger.
But it wasn't a hit on Flair because he didn't want to do business in the Luger match.
No.
Okay.
No. Luger, they were never going to go with Luger. Was never the choice at Starrcade.
Got it.
No, I can tell you what happened because
you're in touch with the Nature Boy.
No, this isn't Rick. This is I'm even closer on this one.
Oh, jeez.
No, because Larry Matisick and I were best friends.
Oh, sure, yeah, he's in, yeah.
Larry Matisick was going to be the next booker. So Jim Herd calls up Larry Matisick, and goes through the whole thing. It's just like, I already knew about the Rick Steiner thing, and I'm livid. Larry Matisick's livid because he doesn't want Rick Steiner to be his world champion. He wants Ric Flair to be his world champion. But he hasn't been hired yet, and Jim Herd's not. I guess Jim Herd actually was in control by then. But anyway, so the other problem is, so Rick is just ready to quit. And that's I guess where it came, where it really came to a head is Jim Herd calls up Larry Matisick and just goes, I got a problem. It's like, Dusty's booking Rick Steiner to beat Ric Flair in 5 minutes, and Herd doesn't know it's a hit. Larry, of course, and me, as soon as we hear that, we go, it's a hit. It's like Rick Steiner was the toughest guy in the promotion, and if Rick didn't want to do business, Rick Steiner's job was to beat the shit out of him and win the championship.
Right.
And and it wouldn't have gotten to that because Rick would have done business. Because they made it a cage match, so there was going to be no, Rick knew what the thing was. 5-minute match. Rick Steiner's told, hey, look, he doesn't cooperate in 5 minutes, then you just beat him in 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's to destroy Ric Flair. It's to just destroy him. That's the goal. Dusty's, that's what it was. The problem was, and it probably would have happened that way, except for Ted Turner. Because Jim Herd goes, there's a problem, because if this, Ric Flair's threatening to quit. He goes, well, that's bad. We need Ric Flair. He goes, no, it's worse. It had to be before November 1st that this happened, because the thing was that Ted was going to just say, fuck it, if Ric Flair quit. I mean, Ted knew Ric Flair and thought that Ric Flair was the world champion, and he was the key guy. So if Rick had gone to WWF, the whole thing would have blown up.
Ted wouldn't have bought?
I don't know what the whole deal was, but I think that the whole thing was going to be,
it was thought to be in jeopardy, that Flair not being part of the package would jeopardize it.
Would jeopardize the sale, and the whole thing would go out of business. And Dusty didn't care. Dusty was just thinking of Dusty at this point.
Right.
So and he just wanted to get rid of Ric Flair.
And Flair worked some kind of angle, didn't he, where he got a lot more control over his finishes in the transaction?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, he definitely had some contractual
which
stuff.
I'm sure drove Dusty nuts.
Well, Dusty was gone as booker pretty quick from this.
Yeah.
So Herd calls up. He calls up Larry Matisic, and Larry Matisic's talking to me throughout. This day we're going back and forth all day, and it's like, yeah, he's going to put a hit on. And so Larry just goes, this is what we got to do. First of all, the big match. There's Ric Flair and Rick Steiner's not the big money match. The big money match is Ric Flair and Lex Luger. So we got to change it. Ric Flair and Lex Luger. And Ric Flair's been abused for so long. Rick's got to win. Rick's got to win. We need Ric Flair as champion. I don't know if they were thinking Ricky Steamboat at this point, but whatever it was, Ric Flair has to be champion. That's the gist of the situation. And we got to beat Luger because Flair never beat Luger. And we got to get the title over, the old way. Champion's got to win. So Herd goes in and tells Dusty, and Dusty freaks out. And that's when Dusty starts, just basically doing everything he can to prove he was boss, and ends up first getting fired as booker, and then, getting fired. Then he quits the promotion or gets fired. I forgot what happened exactly, but he's gone.
Didn't he? Wasn't the final straw when to set up the Road Warriors match with him and Sting? He does the angle on the Clash on TBS where he gets the spike driven into his head and gets color, and it's
Absolutely.
a lot. Yeah.
And he was told ahead of time no. I don't know if it was no color policy, but I think it was no foreign object policy.
Oh, okay.
But there was definitely there was a guideline that they had.
He flew in the face of a new corporate directive, and it was
a corporate directive of what you can't do, and then he went and did exactly what he's told he couldn't do to defy them, to prove he was Dusty. And I don't remember if they fired him from the company or they just took the book away from him. But he was going to lose. He was losing the book anyway. I mean, Matisic was going to be the booker, but then this is where Barnett comes in. Barnett, goes to her and just goes, he. St. Louis isn't the world. And so anyway, he talks him into Mulligan, of all people, as booker. And I think Mulligan may have come in for a week, and then Mulligan quit.
Wow.
I think the feeling was that Larry, you needed, I think Barnett's thing is you needed a tough, everybody respected Dusty because of who Dusty was and the fact he'd been successful for so long.
Yeah, he'd done it. He drew a crowd with his own in-ring. Yeah.
He'd been a good booker. And the wrestlers, all the wrestlers, even the ones who didn't like Dusty, and a lot of them by this point didn't like Dusty, at the end of the day, they all respected that he was Dusty Rhodes.
Yes.
And I think the feeling was Larry Matisic was an office guy and not a wrestler. And a lot of wrestlers in that era, when it came to bookers, did not want to listen to someone who had not taken bumps. It was a thing. If you haven't taken bumps, you don't deserve to book. And it's a stupid idea, but they had that. So, what what they used to do in some territories where the booker, like in Vince Sr., for example, Vince Sr. really booked, but Monsoon was the guy. There was always the
They'd
guy.
They'd prop up a guy who'd done it in the ring to basically carry out the orders of the.
He carried out the orders. In St. Louis, when Larry was booker, they had Pat O'Connor and
Mm.
Bob Brown, who were the ones in the dressing room telling the guys, even though it was, and Sam was really the guy making all the real choices anyway. Bobby Bruns booked and O'Connor booked and all this, and and then they had control to a degree, but at the end of the day, Sam, they didn't do anything that Sam, wouldn't allow. You know what I mean? And
Sure.
Sam was really the booker, just like Vince McMahon's really the booker. But they had somebody else in the dressing room. So anyway, Barnett's thing is we need a tough guy, and Mulligan was a big tough guy, and so they went with Mulligan for whatever reason, drove Mulligan crazy, and then they went with George Scott, and George Scott became the booker, and there was a lot of he'd worked for Vince, and when George Scott came in as booker, there was a lot of positivity toward George Scott because George Scott was Crockett's booker in the late 70s.
Oh yeah.
And George Scott had a great reputation as a booker. I mean, there's people who will tell you different things about that period. And it is true that George Scott, when he booked, he would listen to Mulligan and he would listen to Ole and he would listen to different guys. And, people will go, well, it's really my ideas. But you know what? I mean,
Hey.
that's part of the job of a booker is listening to people and coming up with the right ideas. And if the territory popped, which it did, then you're a good booker. So George Scott was a good booker. But, who's to know? The business changed. Time passes you by.
Yeah. So ultimately, we don't end up with Rick Steiner versus Ric Flair, of course. We end up with Ric Flair versus Lex Luger. And it was basically over the objections of Dusty Rhodes. And so we see kind of a whittling away of Dusty Rhodes' influence. And in short order, he's working for Vince McMahon.
Right. Yeah, with the polka dots.
With the polka dots. Now, final question on Starrcade 88 for you, Dave. We see the sale happen. Turner takes the helm. Jim Crockett exits after a really remarkable run, as kind of well illustrated by.
Jim Crockett's another interesting one. When Jim Crockett sold,
Yeah.
Jim Crockett thought when he sold the promotion that Ted Turner would own it, but he was still going to run it.
Really?
He was completely blindsided by Jack Petrick, and he had a whatever it was, a several-year contract. And he thought, but he was sure he was going to run it, and it was going to be him and Dusty, but they would use Turner's money, and with Turner's money they could fight Vince, and they wouldn't have the financial problems that they had before, and they would have the advantages of being part of the Turner Empire. So they were with a bigger company than Vince. So he thought by selling it that they were going to be able to fight and beat Vince, not realizing that as soon as he sold, Crockett's taken out of the picture.
And was the thought that we'd ever see Jim Crockett in professional wrestling again, because he falls off the face of the earth?
Well, he wanted it, but they never went back to him. He was kept on as a consultant. They never consulted with him. And then when his non-compete was up, he tried to start a promotion in Texas. I remember that. And but for the most part, except for that brief period where he tried to promote in Texas, Jim ends up out of the picture.